I'm sorry, Ron has to leave. He has a flight to catch, but we have a few minutes before we break for coffee, and the panel can take a few questions.
Mr. Is it Westbrook? Is there any, I like the fact that you used actionable information. I really like that terminology. And is there any ramification to these decision support systems that you provide where you lead, where you're recommending a certain energy system, and if it doesn't reach its cost savings, is there any liability involved for your company?
Well, right now, yeah, that's a good question. And what, does it perform well? Well, I think right now with the way that the resource technology as far as identifying resources, and you saw that the numbers had a spread on them. What we advocate is people go in and that there's actually observations taking, and that we marry that up with some of our model predictions, and then we can come up with a real good estimate on what that power is going to be produced at. So there's not a lot of risk, so to speak, that it's going to be way under the estimations that we have. The challenge is, and I think it's been brought up by a few of the other panel members, is workforce training in a lot of these countries and making sure the systems are built, that they're built for years, and that 2 or 3 years later, they're not hanging laundry on the solar panels. Because there's a lot of times there's the initial effort to go in and build the systems, but there's no sustainment built behind it, and we have to do that. And I think that's more of a serious issue.
Thank you. It's always the other end of the room. Thank you very much for those presentations. I was trying to make a connection between the different speakers in my head, and it occurred to me that some of the things that you showed about the community wind power, for example, that this is interesting data also to feed into participatory processes at the local level. And I was trying to envisage how we might actually have a more participatory relationship, which isn't just participatory mapping, but might also be a more wider discussion about how you can use the geographical imagination in processes of participation more general, and inviting people to think about the communities that they live in and making decisions about them, and therefore using all of this information and these visualizations for a more grassroots approach to governance.
I guess that's a comment rather than a question. Any other question? Yes, over there. It's always the other side.
So in participatory mapping, OpenStreetMap, and things like that, we've seen that the community can be engaged, or a remote crowd can be invoked to map streets and buildings and things like that. What are your experiences with actually creating or divining address structures? Because I've seen in other presentations, whether it's for public health, delivering a public health regime to a neighborhood, delivering drugs household to household, or other applications, it's the actual addressing scheme that matters. And I'm unfamiliar with kind of taking the leap from mapping the roads and the buildings to actually institutionalizing an address structure that lets you, start delivering those administrative capacities. Does anybody have any experience?
So, for example, that work that I showed in Dar es Salaam, all those places, they don't have names. The streets don't have names. What they have are numbers used by the census. The houses are marked with numbers, and the code marked in the house also indicates the location. But there are no street names. The work we did didn't lead to create like a grid. I mean, I don't even think you can call them streets, but however, they were useful for the city council to organize, for example, transportation. They had some zones where they act. How they define vulnerability areas. They also are using those definitions now. So maybe it can help them to define better neighborhoods, whatever neighborhood is, for different applications, because they probably don't match either. But in that particular case, it didn't result in creating names. I mean, probably there are applications for that. I mean, there are applications that you map the roads using the same technique. And roads, their roads are bigger, they have names, then you can create cadastral maps and you can create road layers that have all the definitions. So it's totally doable. I've never done it, but it's totally doable.
I have a question for you. In your work, have you come across examples where there is a social opposition to the use of geospatial technology, and what does?
That's a very good question. We didn't find this in Dar es Salaam. In fact, everybody wanted a copy of the maps. The maps are placed in every single wall in ward offices and in the leaders' offices, because to them it was a matter of empowerment. That was in Tanzania. In my work in the Amazon, yes, I had, because people are afraid that I can use, that the researchers could use the imagery to show that they did more deforestation than they should. So that's context specific. I had both sides of the story.
Lee?
Yeah, I think there are examples on both sides as well. Interestingly enough, I think it used to be when we used GPS devices, there was a tremendous amount of concern that we were collecting information with our simple GPS units. Now that everybody has cell phones that are GPS enabled, that have cameras, it's like you can't take someone's cell phone away from them, because it's like taking their mother's milk. So I think that technology has become much more entrenched. But there's still, I think, a threat of the information being used, Marcia, you said, for tax purposes. That goes both ways, because once the government has information for taxes, the people who are participating feel that if they're not getting the services back, then they don't want to provide the information. Also, governments that don't have a good land tenure system developed yet don't want the information to be shared, because there'll be local conflicts that will be generated by the information being made public. So I think it's something that needs to be thought out and managed at the administrative level at the same time as the community participatory level, I think, is engaging. So it's a parallel process.
You mentioned that you weren't going to discuss confidentiality, but that was one of the issues that came up. Can you just talk about it a little bit, and what you mean by confidentiality with respect to the participatory mapping and crowdsourcing?
So I was mentioning confidentiality about the geospatial technologies, not just participatory mapping. There wasn't specific to it. But so the issue is very broad. And you know, there are some cities that they don't allow the Google car to walk around and take the pictures to put, you know, on Google Map. You don't want to see what car you have in the garage or something. There's a very interesting work that was done after Katrina, that there was an article in a newspaper that published a map with dots showing where houses were damaged. And somebody took that picture from the newspaper, re-engineered the map, and was able to get with a precision, I think 85%, all the addresses of those houses, and they went to the addresses and found the houses. So there's several issues regarding, and especially when you work with health, if you're dealing with a particular disease that has stigma, and being able to re-engineer some work that was done and go back and find where that person is, that is a major concern. So we don't have clear-cut rules yet on how to deal with confidentiality issues when dealing with geospatial technologies. We have some. I don't think we're all done yet, but it is a major concern.
I would just like to echo that. I don't think we should look at geospatial technologies as being so unique in that respect. I mean, this is something that has always been concerned, whether it's a simple map that was hand-drawn 200 years ago, whether it's a survey that you protect individuals. So I think sometimes we look at our science as being more unique than we need to, and we try to think there's a need for a separate regime. I think these things will play out over time.
Ken, last comment?
Yeah, I had one comment on that. On the people with the maps that we release, most of the people that are upset or are disturbed by these are usually developers, because they like to keep the information themselves and they like to keep it private. And so when you start making it available to everyone to see where the good spots to develop renewable energy are, they feel like you're taking the gold mine map and giving it to everyone. My contention's always been, hey, we got to move this stuff forward. When the sea rises, all the boats rise more. But I can tell you that when I was at my old company, the disdain of large-scale developers was strong felt, but I don't think it should stop. There was nothing legal they could do. It was just more economic, I think.
So thank you so much for coming, and I just want us to give a big hand to our panel.
There's coffee and tea and stuff out right outside the door, so let's come back in around 15, 20 minutes.
Great job, great job. We should do a book on this. Did they ever give you a copy?
I don't have a, I would send you a copy. But I was going to mention that in my introductory comments. I think that's one of the best examples of exactly what you're talking about.
2,000 copies distributed now.
Enjoyed your talk. Yeah, good to see you again.
I see you. Good.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?